I'm Leanne Tran, psychologist who's worked with families whose kids don't fit the mould for almost 20 years. I've worked with children for decades, but I know parents are the real change makers when it comes to their kids. Having 3 kids of my own means I know it's not easy. Parent Like a Psychologist is all about simplifying how you support your kids with psychology information filtered through years of experience to take you from overwhelmed to confident. Come on in. So welcome everyone to another episode of Parent Like a Psychologist, and a special welcome to you, Rosemary Gattuso. Thanks so much for joining me on the episode today.
Thanks, Leanne. It's great to be here.
So I'm excited to talk with you today because you work a lot in family dispute resolution, and you've helped many families not only to separate, but also to establish really kind of great child or relationships with each other and their children in a child-focused way. I think that's such an important thing in terms of separated families, which I've talked about a little bit on the podcast before. But you also, so you have a background in law and you're great at mediation. You also run workshops to support kids to find their own self-identity. And, that's all round. You're helping the kids and the parents, but also teachers, I guess, as well. It's a broad range of experience, which is going to be so useful to hear about. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
I'm interested to hear more about, I guess, separation is something I think that's never easy to talk about in terms of if before families have done it, but it's something that affects parents of neurodivergent kids and kids with a disability at a much higher rate than the average marriage, I guess. What kind of tips do you have for families going into that?
Yeah. Well, I'd say for parents to really be kind to themselves in the process, because it is, going to be one of the hardest times in their lives. And it's about really them to reestablish their roles and responsibilities as parents. And they may have, neurodiverse or children with disabilities who have extra needs and might need extra attention or might be responding to the separation in a different way, to other kids. And on top of that, there's the financial element, because it does impact financial, and the emotional and the grief and loss process of losing the family unit as it was, losing that relationship and, becoming single and navigating all that, plus all the other people around who are giving their input and, their, I guess, opinion as well. And so I'd say the first thing is to go easy on yourself and be kind to yourself, because it's hard and it's not about fixing it in one go. It's about taking, I guess, a community approach, because there'll be people who will be able to help the kids. There'll be people who'll be able to give you the financial advice, and there'll be people who will be able to support the emotional aspect of the grief and loss process. So it really takes a team of support and even, your own journey in listening to podcasts and reading books and doing whatever helps, I guess, to keep you sane in this process. So, and it really involves, I guess, a lot of patience and also self-compassion.
Yeah, that's really good advice, because I think often what I find is a theme that runs through the difficulties in parenting, no matter what it is, comes down to that kind of self-compassion or parents feeling like they're not doing well enough and judging their own parenting and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I like that approach. You talk also about how to try to change for parents to change their focus from deficits or difficulties to strengths. Can you tell me more about that in that separation process?
Yeah, and I guess what happens is when we're going through that grief and loss process, it tends to make it easier for us to focus on what's wrong in the situation, what we've lost, and what we have to make up again. and as well as it's more about narrowing down through like having a narrower lens that really focuses on us.
Mm-hmm.
And when there are safety concerns, then that's totally what you have to do. Focus on the individual, the now, and what's needed. But when there aren't any safety concerns, and the focus is honed in on one individual, on yourself in the family, sometimes then you miss the broader picture. You miss what's in the background, and that's the continual conflict of interest that I find, where it's about what I need versus what the family needs, and it's a real challenge to try and have a broader lens that also looks at, the benefits or the strengths in the situation, or even if when things don't go as planned, there's always a lesson from that. There's also something that can be learned from there. But when we're in that narrower view, it's harder to see the lessons and it's harder to see the strengths. But when we sort of expand, we can see the strengths more. And then we can also be more child focused, because we're opening up the lens. And that's the challenge, because it's a conflict of interest there, and balancing when to go to look at the individual and when to have a more open, broader lens and a strengths-based lens that encompasses the family. But it's also having a strengths-based lens when we look at ourselves in terms of our parenting and our financial situation and what we're doing and what we're not doing. It's also about, when we are looking inwards, then are we predominantly highlighting what's wrong, or can we sometimes focus on our strengths and what's strong?
Mm-hmm. That's a great piece of advice, I think, because I can see what you mean about that tension between looking after ourselves as individuals versus what the family needs. And sometimes when we feel like we're in that survival mode, it's harder to take that step back and see the bigger picture and the strengths. Strengths could be a good way to help you do that. Yeah. The other thing that stood out to me there that you were saying was about, oh, it's gone. I lost it.
That's okay. But
That's all right.
I should also note that, in my, years as a mediator and my observations of the way people manage adversity, what I noticed is that those who tended to have a strengths-based lens, or could look at and see the strengths in a situation and what's wrong more than they focused on what's wrong and the deficits and the lacking, they tended to overcome their hurdles a lot quicker and in a lot smoother. And it was easier for them also to have a future focus and to see their situation as it could be in the future, rather than sort of stay in the past and be held back by past hurts.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, it's not easy to do, is it, to
No, not at
shift your
all.
focus like that. But yeah, but it is really important because it lets you look after the kids, I guess. And from my point of view, that's what I'm all about.
Yeah.
Do you have, because it is hard, do you have any strategies that parents can use to shift their thinking to that strengths focused way?
Yeah. Well, I guess the main thing is to, again, be easy on yourself, because there are many influences and many layers of influences that determine whether or not our default is to highlight what's wrong. And they're things that have been established at a young age when we were children, and it depended on our upbringing, our experiences, our unique sort of individual personalities and characteristics that really determine whether our default is to take the path of what's wrong or
Yeah.
what's strong. So, but there's also value in learning from the times when we didn't take the path of what's strong, because when we're able to reflect on the times that we went down the path of what's wrong and we went into that mode, that narrow mode, and then we can learn from it. And that's where then we can use that for the next step. So it's really about reflection, being able to reflect. And I mean, as a mediator, my role is to, not take sides, to not give a judgment or an opinion. It's being very neutral and independent. So I would say to parents, well, be your own mediator.
Hmm.
Don't, because it's so easy for us to then go down the path of what's wrong in our own self-talk
Yeah.
and the way
Yep.
we reflect on what we've done. And then it sort of goes down the road of overthinking. But whereas when we're able to highlight the strengths, see the learning opportunities and the benefits and how we can do things differently next time, then we're going down a path of what's wrong. And our self-talk goes from overthinking to reflection.
Mm. Yep. That's another piece of good advice. I feel like I'm taking a lot of this in for me personally as well, because it's something all of us can use from time to time.
Definitely. I mean, it's not limited to family separation. I mean, that's how these observations really emerge through my work as a mediator. But
Hmm.
ultimately, they're tools that you can use in day to day.
Yeah. And so part of your work is to work in schools with students to develop skills, I imagine similar to this. Is that right?
Yes, it's all based on this strengths-based approach, which is also the topic of my book. And so what I do is I share these ideas with high school students to help. It's really about giving them a physical tool that they can use to help guide their self-talk and also their interactions with others as well. And it could also be interactions with situations, the way that, they perceive their current experience. Because
Yeah.
once you have this what's wrong and what's strong idea, it's really hard not to see it in situations. It's
Hmm.
I mean, we might not see it straight away when we're going through it, but then afterwards, and that's where there is the value in being able to reflect on it, categorize it, and extract the lessons there. So this is about giving them a different lens to view the world at a young age. And I guess why, it's also about helping to build their own sense of self and self-esteem, because what I know, what I sort of what I realized, I guess, or saw was that our self-esteem is really made up of two types of interactions. There are interactions that we have with ourselves and the interactions that we have with others. And that's also situations, not just physical people.
Mm.
And they can either come under what's wrong or what's strong, the quality of those interactions. And so when our interactions, either with ourselves or with others, highlight what's strong, then it builds on our sense of self.
Yeah.
But whereas when our interactions with ourselves and others highlight on what's wrong, then it can take away from our sense of self. And so I guess this is why, I'm so determined to get this, out there in schools to help give students just a different way, a different lens to view their current situation, and the impacts, the repercussions are quite deep in terms of, our sense of self. And when I talk about the sense of self, I see it as how much we believe in ourselves.
Yeah.
And so when we believe in ourselves, then we're more resilient, and we're able to then look at a situation and extract the learnings from it rather than beat ourselves up for making a mistake. And the other part of why it's important that we believe in ourselves or have a strong sense of self is that we're able to then continue to pursue our dreams and our goals and do things our way despite the doubt of others.
Yeah. Yep. I love that thinking because yeah, I love just what you said, being able to follow what we want to do despite the doubt of others is so powerful. And those situations you were talking about, I'm thinking that often how we think about things really determines how we feel about things and then our choices and actions. And it's a skill that would be so great for kids to learn at school because it's something as adults we can still struggle with.
That's right. And I guess what I was thinking about this is it's more about prevention rather than cure, because, we go through adult life looking at podcasts, going through repeat sort of patterns, reading books, looking for information, trying to get support, going to professionals to help us.
Mm.
But what if it was preventable, or part of it? What if there, it's early intervention?
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes time to practice a skill as well. So the earlier they kids can learn it, the better.
That's right. And that's why it's really important for me that when I do go to a school and explore these, scenarios with them, I then have a follow-up session so that they can then ask questions or, come up with specific areas that they want to explore a little more.
Excellent. And you mentioned that it's especially helpful for kids who maybe have, are sensitive kids or emotional kids. How do you find that it's extra helpful for them?
Yeah, I think, well, if being sensitive means that, I guess, the external stimulus is going to have extra weight. That's
Yeah.
how I sort of try to explore it. And so if, we have a tool that helps us to then categorize our self-talk, because I think it's more about the self-talk when,
Hmm.
for those sensitive children, because or adults, it's about taking on what's happening or what's said in a deeper way,
Yeah.
and giving more, and it's also more responsibility on the self to do something or not do something because someone else is going to be negatively impacted, and that can be reflected in that self-talk and low, I guess, that what's wrong lens for the self.
Mm.
So I guess my hope is that this gives a bit of a tool to help reflect on, and also this idea of building the sense of self as well, being that awareness. But it's also important that the parents are on board as well, and so that the parents know that their words are going to have more weight, and for
Hmm.
the parents to see that when my words tend to come under what's wrong, whether or actions, whether it's direct or indirect, then I have a sensitive child and they're going to take it on a little bit more.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
it's about balancing how much is it for the child to do the learning, and how much is it for the parents to then say, well, this is my child, and so for now, and it's more obvious, I mean, in my work, because then I'll sit down with parents and say, this is your child, so how do you want to then have conversations and do the pick up and the drop off and the changeover, and to take into account that sensitivity.
Yeah. That's you're kind of then helping everybody in that scenario, I think.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear what is the name, or tell us a bit about your book.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, my book, it's really based on what we've been talking about, my observations as a mediator of how people
Yeah.
manage adversity, and encouraging that going from overthinking to self-reflection. And it's called It's Not You, It's Me, a chronic overthinker's guide to self-reflection.
Hmm.
And it explores these ideas of what's wrong and what's strong, and there is a bit of the evidence behind maybe why we tend to go down the path of what's wrong as opposed to what's wrong. And I guess once we know the why, it helps us to then unpack and explore. And there's also lots of reflection tasks throughout to help build on the concepts, one at a time. And it's all, they're all catered for the individual situation. So your scenarios, your topics, and your challenges to work through in those activities.
That sounds great because it's not an idea that is easy to just read about and then do. So it takes a reflection to change our patterns of thinking about things.
That's right. And you're right. It's something that definitely takes time. And it's, I mean, a couple of days ago, I found myself walking down the street and I was thinking about what was wrong in a situation. And then I thought, oh, I'm doing it, and it's
Yeah.
so, and just for something little, but it's so easy to go down that road, and that's fine. It's about that awareness, and then thinking, okay, well, how can I use this for the next time?
Yeah. I really like that the idea you're talking about what's wrong or what's strong is so simple in terms of a phrase. I know
Yeah,
the idea and
yeah,
doing it's not simple, but it's something that you could, constantly ask your kids about and ask yourself about. Am I thinking about what's wrong or what's strong? Or when your kids are talking about a scenario at school, you could use that kind of question for them. Yeah, because it's simple, it rhymes. So I feel
yeah.
like it could be used even for kids, because you mostly work with teenagers in schools, is that
Yes,
right? High school.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
But I think for even kids way younger than that, simple phrase could be really powerful.
Yes, yeah, that's right. It is so simple, yet in practice it can be quite challenging. And so what I've done in the book is that I've broken it down into specific examples of what's wrong and what strong can look like. And it's you can make up your own. It's essentially about using opposites. So if I'm in judgment mode, then I'm not in understanding mode. And so it's,
Hmm.
am I closer to judgment or understanding? And then judgment obviously is under what's wrong, and understanding is under what's strong. And there's, quite a few of those in the book that form the tool that I propose, the scales of self-reflection. But it's just about opposites. You can make up your own to that where one is what's wrong and the other side is what's strong.
Mm. Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm imagining parents talking to their kids about this and using that kind of question about what's wrong and what's strong. Do you have, is there another, well, not another, but because I think that's the key thing to focus on, the what's wrong or what's strong, but is there a way that you've seen parents be able to use that practically to help their kids?
I think it's about that the awareness, even as a parent, of what my own language is. Is
Hmm.
my language focusing on what's wrong or what's strong?
Yeah, right.
Because sometimes it's not intentional, or it's not direct, or it's not even sort of almost not conscious, because that's just the language that we're so used to.
Yeah.
Because then that's also modeling, because
Yes.
children just
Yep.
repeat what they see and what they're used to. So I think and that can be a challenge as well,
Mm,
because sometimes we don't realize how negative our own language is. And what can help is to think about it in terms of, well, not only what's wrong and what's strong, but am I giving a closed question or an open question
yeah.
as well? Does the question include my hypotheses about a situation, or is it a yes no answer? Or does it show more curiosity
Hmm.
and leave it more to the child to then give the answer, rather than have what I think is the answer in the wording? And I also include an activity on exploring the open and closed questions in the book. So,
Yeah.
and what's a very basic one at the top of my head is, do you eat pancakes for breakfast? Would be a
Hmm.
closed question. The open one would be, what do you eat for breakfast?
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, that doesn't really, have what's wrong or what's strong. But I guess if I was thinking, do you always act that way? Or,
Yeah.
so,
Exactly. Or I'm thinking of one that's more around like the separation issue, but do you want to go to slash mum or dad's? And it's kind of if it's when you give that closed, yes, no option, it's almost like
yeah,
it's implied in the question that there's a right and wrong answer, isn't there?
yeah. Do you
Yeah.
feel
So
comfortable at that? Like, even something that's leading?
yeah, that's right. That's right. So
And that's
there's
hard,
two,
because then it's also, separation is quite complex and there's many
yeah,
layers. And if you have an inkling that something's not right, then I'd say, well, you want to pursue it, but you don't want to do more harm, or potentially do more harm to your child, especially if they're an overthinker or they're sensitive, or and seem to be struggling more than the other kids in this situation. So it's delicate.
yeah, yeah. But it's about trying to take our focus away from what's wrong to maybe open it up to be more neutral at least, or thinking about
Yes.
the strengths in the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if it's something that you're unsure about, then ask someone. There'll be someone out there who'll be able to help, whether or not it's at a family relationship center or a counselor or a mediator or psychologist or teacher,
Yeah.
or there's so many resources out there.
Yeah. But I love these two resources that you've just given us for families today. And one is to think about, well, they're both the same, but different. So thinking about what's wrong or what's strong, I think is great in order for talking with kids about it. But then also for us as parents too, it's thinking about that for ourselves and being really conscious of the language we're using and how we're modeling that stuff to our kids. Are we modeling
Yeah.
a strength-based outlook, or are we modeling the outlook that looks for all of the problems?
That's right. And look, that can be a challenge because maybe our parents, had a tendency to focus on what's wrong.
Yeah.
So it's about going against what we were taught as well.
Yeah. And that's the tricky bit about parenting. And so, yeah, in the programs I do with parents, it's lots about reflection, about, really becoming more aware of what you're doing as parenting. And it sounds like your book promotes a lot of that reflection as well, which is great.
Yes, thank you.
So, just one last question, but what do you have coming up next for working with kids in schools? Are you done for the year, or do you have one more?
Yeah, definitely done for the year and winding down and just preparing and getting set up for next year.
Yep. That's great. I think kids have switched off by now anyway.
Yeah,
Late November as we're recording this. So yeah,
yeah.
that's great. Can parents find out more about you on your website, or is there another place to
Yep.
find good info?
Everything's on my website, and I'm also contactable through all the social media as well. But my website's the best place to go.
Excellent. And it sounds like your book would be awesome. I would love to have a go at that. So I'll be ordering one for myself.
Sounds good.
Yeah, always keen to learn and do that self-reflection. I think it's, you can never know it all. There's always something to gain from every exercise you do.
That's right. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. And sometimes it's a surprise.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like it's been a conversation that's been really helpful for me and interesting, but I also think those key idea that parents can use at home will be really helpful for lots and lots of families. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us.
Thanks, Leanne. It's been really great chatting with you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Parent Like a Psychologist. If you found it helpful, please share on Instagram so other parents can benefit too, and tag me at Leanne Tran Psychology so that I can say a big thank you. Head over to leannetran.com.au to join the village for bite-sized psychology tips straight to your inbox. I really hope this podcast has brought a new perspective and you a step closer towards a calm parent and a thriving child. Have a delightful day.